The smoke from the grill curled lazily into the summer sky as I flipped burgers with practiced ease. Our backyard was packed with neighbors and friends, exactly the kind of gathering my wife Sarah loved to host. She thrived in the spotlight, her laughter ringing out above the conversations, her hand constantly touching shoulders as she worked the crowd like a seasoned politician. I'd been manning the grill for the past hour, content in my quiet corner while Sarah held court by the pool. Our marriage had been rocky lately, more distance than connection, more silence than conversation. But I'd hoped this party might remind us of better times, might bring back some of the warmth that had slowly leaked out of our relationship over the past 2 years. "Mark," Sarah's voice cut through the chatter. "Mark, honey, come here for a second." I set down the spatula and wiped my hands on my apron, weaving through clusters of guests toward the patio table where Sarah stood, wine glass raised, practically glowing with some barely contained excitement. My stomach tightened. I knew that look, the same expression she wore when she'd bought a car without consulting me, or when she'd announced we were moving to this neighborhood because she'd already made an offer on the house. Everyone. She clinked her glass with a fork, and the backyard gradually fell silent. "I have an announcement to make, and I wanted to share it with all our closest friends." I reached her side, confused. She looped her arm through mine, squeezing tight, her perfume overwhelming in the summer heat. Around us, curious faces turned our way. Tom and Linda from next door, the Johnsons from 2 streets over, Sarah's book club friends, and her childhood best friend Rachel, who stood near the fence, her green eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mark and I have been doing a lot of soul-searching lately," Sarah continued, her voice bright and confident. "And we've realized that traditional marriage, all those old-fashioned rules and restrictions, they just don't work for modern people like us." A few confused chuckles rippled through the crowd. I felt my face grow hot, but not from the grill's proximity. "So we've decided to have an open marriage," Sarah announced triumphantly, as if she'd just revealed we were going to Disney World. "We're going to explore other connections, be truly authentic to ourselves, and trust that our bond is strong enough to handle anything." The backyard went graveyard silent. Someone's beer bottle clinked awkwardly against a table. Tom cleared his throat. Linda's eyes went wide as saucers, darting between Sarah's beaming face and my frozen expression. "We?" I heard myself say quietly. "Oh, don't be shy, honey." Sarah laughed, squeezing my arm harder. "I know you're more reserved about these things, but we talked about this. Remember? About being honest about what we need? We had talked. Or rather, she had talked at me 2 nights ago while I was half asleep, rambling about some article she'd read about ethical non-monogamy and modern relationships. I'd thought it was just another one of her thought experiments, like when she'd decided we should raise chickens or convert to veganism for a month. But looking at her now, at the certainty in her eyes and the challenge in her smile, I realized this wasn't a thought experiment. This was a declaration, a unilateral decision dressed up as mutual agreement, announced publicly so I couldn't argue, couldn't object, couldn't do anything but stand there and smile while she rewrote the rules of our marriage in front of everyone we knew. My eyes swept the crowd, the shocked faces, the uncomfortable shifting, the way several people suddenly found their phones fascinating. Then my gaze landed on Rachel, still standing by the fence, her expression a mixture of sadness and something else, something that looked almost like hope. Rachel, who Sarah had always been strangely possessive about, forbidding me from being alone with her, making snide comments whenever Rachel and I talked too long at gatherings. Rachel, whose eyes I'd caught on me too many times over the years, whose smile faltered whenever Sarah mentioned our anniversary plans. Something inside me crystallized into perfect, cold clarity. "You're right," I said, my voice steady and calm. "We should be authentic." Sarah's smile widened triumphantly. She expected me to retreat to the grill, to let her have her moment, to be the quiet, compliant husband I'd always been. Instead, I stepped away from her and walked directly toward Rachel. Time seemed to slow as I crossed the patio. Each step felt deliberate, purposeful, like I was walking through water. The crowd's confusion was palpable. I could feel their eyes tracking my movement, their collective breath held in anticipation of what would happen next. Rachel's eyes widened as I approached. She stood frozen, one hand gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter, the other pressed against the fence as if she needed support. Her auburn hair caught the late afternoon sun, and for the first time in years I really looked at her. Not in stolen glances or guilty peripheral vision, but directly, openly, without shame. "Mark?" she whispered as I stopped in front of her, close enough that only she could hear the hammering of my heart. Behind me I heard Sarah's confused laugh. "Mark, what are you—" I cupped Rachel's face in my hands. Her skin was warm, soft, and she trembled slightly under my touch. For a moment we just stared at each other, and in her green eyes I saw everything. Years of hidden feelings, countless moments of restraint, all the conversations we'd cut short because Sarah was watching, all the times our hands had almost touched and didn't. "I'm being authentic," I said softly, answering both Rachel and my wife. Then I kissed her. The world exploded. Rachel's wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the concrete, but neither of us flinched. Her hands came up to my chest, whether to push me away or pull me closer. I don't think even she knew. But then her fingers curled into my shirt and she kissed me back with a desperation that told me everything I needed to know. The backyard erupted in gasps and exclamations. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" Tom's nervous laughter cut off abruptly, but loudest of all was Sarah's voice, shrill and furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I broke the kiss slowly, reluctantly, keeping my eyes on Rachel for a long moment. Her lips were parted, her breath coming fast, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling, really smiling, in a way I'd never seen before. Then I turned to face my wife. Sarah stood in the center of the patio, her face flushed scarlet, her perfectly styled hair somehow looking disheveled despite not a strand being out of place. The wineglass in her hand shook, and I distantly registered that several guests had taken cautious steps backward, creating a circle around her like she was a bomb about to detonate. "What am I doing?" I replied calmly, though my heart was racing like a jackhammer. "I'm participating in our open marriage. You just announced it to everyone here. I'm simply being authentic to what I need." I echoed her words back to her, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone present. "Not with her," Sarah shrieked, pointing at Rachel. "Not with my best friend. That's not how this works." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Because you didn't mention any rules. You said explore other connections. You said be authentic to ourselves. Were there supposed to be restrictions you forgot to mention during your announcement?" The crowd was dead silent now, everyone watching this domestic implosion like it was a car crash they couldn't look away from. Linda had her hand over her mouth. Tom was recording on his phone, something I'd address with him later, but right now I had bigger concerns. We never, Sarah sputtered, her confident facade cracking. "You were supposed to say no. You were supposed to be uncomfortable, and then I could—" She stopped abruptly, but the damage was done. The truth hung in the air, obvious to everyone. This had been a test, or worse, a setup. She'd wanted me to object, to play the jealous, controlling husband so she could paint me as the bad guy, the one holding her back from her authentic self. Or maybe she'd simply wanted permission to do whatever she'd already been planning, assuming I'd be too timid to do the same. "You could what, Sarah?" I asked quietly. "Make me look like the bad guy? Get what you wanted while I stayed home being faithful? What was the plan here?" Rachel moved to my side and I felt her hand slip into mine. Her palm was sweaty and she was still shaking, but her grip was firm. That simple gesture said more than words ever could. Sarah's eyes fixed on our joined hands and something ugly twisted her features. "You've been wanting to do this," she hissed at Rachel. "You've been circling him for years, waiting for your chance like a vulture." "That's not fair," Rachel said softly, but with steel underneath. "You're the one who changed the rules, Sarah. You announced an open marriage without even really discussing it with your husband. What did you think would happen?" "I thought he'd be a man about it," Sarah snapped. "I thought he'd have some dignity instead of humiliating me in front of everyone by throwing himself at my best friend." The hypocrisy was stunning. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, and I saw a few knowing looks exchanged. They were all thinking the same thing I was. Sarah's reaction revealed this had never been about openness or authenticity. It had been about control. Sarah's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine. Rage, humiliation, disbelief, and finally settling on a cold fury that I recognized from every argument we'd ever lost control of. But this time there was no privacy to contain it, no walls to muffle the explosion. Our marriage was detonating in front of 30 witnesses and everyone knew it. Get out, she said, her voice low and venomous. Both of you, get out of my house. Our house, I corrected automatically, a reflex from years of being steamrolled. I pay half the mortgage, I don't care. Her voice rose to a shriek. You want to humiliate me? Fine. But you're not doing it at my party in my home with my friends watching. There are friends, Rachel said quietly. Her hand was still in mine, and though she trembled, she didn't let go. And most of them are wondering what you expected to happen when you announced an open marriage to a husband who clearly knew nothing about it. Stay out of this. Sarah whirled on her. You're a snake, Rachel. You always have been, smiling in my face, being my best friend while fantasizing about my husband. That's enough, I interrupted, my voice harder than I'd ever used with Sarah. Rachel hasn't done anything wrong. She's been nothing but loyal to you for 15 years. Even when you treated her like an accessory you could pick up and discard whenever you wanted. Sarah's mouth opened and closed. Around us I could see heads nodding subtly. Sarah had always been the dominant one in their friendship, the one who chose when they got together, who controlled the conversations, who made Rachel feel grateful just to be included. You know what? Tom from next door spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension. I think maybe we should all head out. Give you folks some privacy to work through this. It was the social cue everyone had been waiting for. Like synchronized swimmers, the crowd began gathering purses and half-eaten plates, mumbling awkward goodbyes and avoiding eye contact. Within 5 minutes, the backyard had emptied except for Sarah, Rachel, and me. The silence was deafening. Sarah stood alone by the patio table, her arms wrapped around herself, looking suddenly small despite her 5'9" frame. The confidence that had radiated from her 20 minutes ago had evaporated, leaving behind something brittle and cracked. This isn't how it was supposed to go, she said finally, her voice barely audible. How is it supposed to go, Sarah? I asked, genuinely curious now. Walk me through your plan. You announce an open marriage in front of everyone. Then what? She was silent for a long moment, staring at the abandoned burgers smoking on the grill. Finally she spoke. There's someone at work, Derek from accounting. We've been talking a lot, and I thought, she swallowed hard. I thought if we had an open marriage, I could explore that without feeling guilty, without having to sneak around. The confession should have hurt more than it did, but I felt oddly numb. So you were already cheating. It wasn't cheating. We were just talking, but the defensive tone confirmed everything. And you thought announcing it publicly would force my hand? I continued, the pieces clicking together. You thought I'd either go along with it quietly, letting you do whatever you wanted while I sat home waiting, or I'd object and you could paint me as controlling and use that to justify whatever you'd already done with Derek. Sarah's silence was answer enough. Rachel made a small sound beside me, something between a laugh and a sob. You know what the worst part is? She said to Sarah. I've watched you manipulate him for years. Watched you make him feel small. Watched you override every decision. Watched you forbid him from even talking to me because you were so possessive. Not because you loved him, but because you loved owning him. And I said nothing because you were my friend. Some friend you are, Sarah spat. Kissing my husband the second you got the chance. You gave him permission. Rachel's voice rose, years of frustration finally bubbling over. You stood up there and announced an open marriage. You changed the rules, and the second he played by your new rules, you couldn't handle it because it was never about openness or honesty. It was about you getting what you wanted while he stayed loyal. Sarah's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw genuine pain there, but then she straightened, her jaw set. Fine, you want each other? Have each other. But don't expect me to make this easy. I'll fight you for everything, Mark, the house, the savings, everything. I don't want to fight, I said tiredly. I just want out. Too bad. Sarah grabbed her phone from the patio table. You humiliated me today. You made me look like a fool in front of everyone we know. You're going to pay for that. She stormed into the house, slamming the sliding door so hard the glass rattled. Rachel and I stood in the empty backyard, the smoke from the forgotten burgers creating a haze between us and reality. My hand was still in hers, but the adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a trembling exhaustion. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered. I never wanted it to happen like this. How did you want it to happen? I asked, turning to face her fully. She looked up at me, her green eyes shimmering with tears. I wanted you to wake up one morning and realize you deserved better. I wanted you to leave her because you chose yourself, not because of me. I never wanted to be the reason your marriage ended. You're not the reason, I said firmly. Sarah ended our marriage the moment she decided Derek from accounting was more interesting than working on our problems. You were just the catalyst that made me see it clearly. What happens now? She asked. I looked at the house, at the life I'd built with Sarah, the mortgage payments and the shared Netflix account and the photo albums filled with smiling lies. Then I looked at Rachel, at the woman who'd been in the background of my life for so many years. Always there, always patient, always kind. Now, I said slowly, I figure out who I am without her, and maybe if you're willing you can help me figure that out. Rachel smiled through her tears. I've been willing for 8 years. The confession hung between us heavy with all its implications. 8 years. Our entire friendship she'd carried this secret. 8 years? I repeated. She nodded. Since your 30th birthday party. You were telling that story about teaching kids at the community center, and your whole face lit up. Sarah made some dismissive comment about it being a waste of time and you just dimmed, like someone had turned down your brightness. And I thought, she doesn't see him. She doesn't see how amazing he is. Rachel took a shaky breath. I told myself I'd get over it, that it was just a crush. But every time I saw you, every time Sarah treated you like an afterthought, it got harder to ignore. The next 2 weeks were a blur of lawyers, boxes, and awkward silences. I moved into a furnished apartment across town. Nothing special, just a generic one-bedroom with beige walls and a view of the parking lot. But it was mine. Sarah had indeed made good on her threat to fight for everything, her lawyer sending aggressive emails about asset division and demanding I continue paying the full mortgage while we sorted things out. But the thing about finally standing up to a bully is that once you do it once, it gets easier every time after. I hired my own lawyer, documented every shared expense from our entire marriage, and prepared to settle this like adults even if Sarah wasn't interested in being one. The neighborhood gossip had spread like wildfire. Linda from next door texted me, apologetic messages about how she'd always thought Sarah was a bit much. Tom sent me the video he'd recorded, which I immediately asked him to delete along with an offer to grab beers and talk about it, man to man. I politely declined. The last thing I needed was to become the neighborhood sob story, but the most unexpected fallout came from Sarah's own circle. 3 of her book club friends reached out privately, each with a similar story. Sarah had been talking about Derek from accounting for months, describing him as more ambitious and more exciting than me. She'd apparently been building her case for an open marriage long before the BBQ, testing the waters with her friends to see who would support her. None of them had. They'd just been too polite to say so. Rachel and I didn't rush into anything. The kiss at the BBQ had been explosive and necessary, but we both knew that starting a relationship in the middle of my divorce would be messy and complicated. So we took it slow, coffee dates where we talked for hours, walks in the park where comfortable silences felt natural, movie nights in my sparse apartment where we sat on opposite ends of the couch like nervous teenagers. I don't want to be your rebound, she told me one evening. Her wine glass balanced on her knee as we watched the sunset through my mediocre window view. I've waited 8 years. I can wait a little longer until you're really ready. What if I'm already ready? I asked. She turned to look at me, her expression serious. You're not. You're angry and hurt and feeling betrayed. Those are valid feelings. But they're not the same as being ready for something new. I don't want to be the Band-Aid on your broken marriage. I want to be the beginning of something real. Her honesty was refreshing in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Sarah had always dealt in manipulation and half-truths, controlling conversations by controlling information. Rachel just said what she meant. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. You're right, I admitted. I am angry. Every time my lawyer sends me another nasty email from Sarah's lawyer, I want to burn everything down. Every time I remember her standing there at that BBQ so confident that I'd just accept whatever she wanted, I want to... I stopped, took a breath. I'm not the vengeful type. I never have been. But God, Rachel, she made me feel so small for so long, and I let her. You didn't let her, Rachel said firmly. That's not how emotional manipulation works. She eroded you gradually over years until you stopped recognizing that what she was doing wasn't normal. I knew she was right, but the shame still burned. I should have left sooner. Maybe. But you left when you were ready. That's what matters. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to dark blue. Then Rachel spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. I need to tell you something. About Sarah. I turned to face her, sensing this was important. About 6 months ago she came to me, Rachel continued, not meeting my eyes. She told me that she knew I had feelings for you. She'd apparently known for years. And she said that if I ever acted on those feelings, if I ever tried to steal her husband, she would destroy me. She'd tell everyone I'd been trying to break up her marriage, turn all our mutual friends against me, even contact my boss and make up stories about my character. Ice flooded my veins. She threatened you? More than once. Anytime you and I talked for too long at a party, anytime you laughed at one of my jokes, she'd pull me aside later and remind me of my place. Rachel's hands were shaking now, the wine threatening to spill. That's why I always kept my distance, why I cut conversations short. Not because I didn't want to talk to you, God, I always wanted to talk to you, but because she made it clear that getting close to you would cost me everything. The cruelty of it staggered me. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? Rachel asked simply. 6 months ago, would you have believed that your wife was threatening your friend, or would you have thought I was trying to cause problems? She was right. 6 months ago, I would have made excuses for Sarah. I would have convinced myself Rachel had misunderstood, that Sarah was just being protective, that there was a reasonable explanation. I'd spent so many years making excuses that it had become second nature. I'm sorry, I said. I'm so sorry she did that to you. It's not your fault. Rachel finally looked at me, and the pain in her eyes was old and deep. But it's part of why I need you to be sure about this, about us. Because when you're finally ready, when we finally try to be together for real, she's going to do everything she can to destroy it. She'll spread rumors, turn people against us, make our lives hell. I need to know you're strong enough to weather that. That you won't wake up one morning and decide I'm not worth the trouble. I reached over and took her hand, the same way I had at the BBQ, but gentler now, more certain. You're worth it. You're worth all of it, but you're also right that I need time to heal first. Not because I doubt you, but because I need to remember who I am without her voice in my head. Rachel nodded, squeezing my hand. Then take your time. I'm not going anywhere. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Sarah got the house. She'd fought viciously for it, and ultimately I didn't care enough to battle over a building filled with bad memories. I got my fair share of our savings, my car, and most importantly, my freedom. The legal document that arrived via certified mail felt less like an ending and more like a prison release. The day the papers were signed, Rachel texted me, "Congratulations on your freedom. No pressure, but I'm making pasta tonight if you want to celebrate." I showed up at her apartment with flowers and wine, my hands shaking as I knocked. When she opened the door, wearing jeans and an old college sweatshirt with her hair in a messy bun, I thought she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Hi," she said, smiling. "Hi," I replied. We stood there like idiots for a moment before she laughed and pulled me inside. Dinner was perfect, not because the food was fancy or the wine was expensive, but because we talked and laughed without any shadows hanging over us. No Sarah to interrupt, no fear of repercussions, no need to cut conversations short or maintain careful distance. Just two people who'd been circling each other for years, finally free to exist in the same space without guilt. "I have something to confess," I said after we'd finished eating, settling onto her couch with coffee. "That kiss at the BBQ? I'd been wanting to do that for at least 2 years. Rachel's eyes widened. 2 years? You never said, how could I? I interrupted gently. I was married. Unhappily married, sure, but married. And Sarah had made it clear you were off limits. But every time I saw you, every time we talked, I felt more alive than I did in my entire marriage. I just didn't let myself acknowledge it because acknowledging it would have meant admitting my marriage was over." "When did you know?" she asked. "That it was really over?" I thought back to the BBQ, to Sarah's triumphant announcement and the gasps of the crowd. The moment she announced that open marriage, and I saw the calculation in her eyes. She didn't want openness, she wanted permission to cheat while keeping me as a backup plan. And in that moment, I realized I didn't want to be anyone's backup plan anymore. I wanted to be someone's first choice. You are, Rachel said softly. You always have been, at least to me. I set down my coffee and turned to face her fully. I'm ready now. Really ready. Not angry Mark who kissed you to prove a point. Not heartbroken Mark who needs someone to heal him. Just me. And I'd really like to take you on a proper date, if you're still interested. Rachel laughed, tears welling in her eyes. We literally just had dinner. Wasn't that a date? That was pasta with a friend. I'm talking about a real date. Reservations, getting dressed up, me being nervous and probably spilling something on my shirt. The whole traditional cliché experience. That sounds terrible, she said, grinning. When? Friday? It's a date. We sat there smiling at each other like idiots until Rachel broke the silence. So what happened with Sarah and Derek from accounting? I snorted. Crashed and burned within a month. Turns out Derek was married too, and his wife wasn't interested in ethical non-monogamy. She showed up at Sarah's office and made a scene. According to Linda's text chain, which I'm still somehow part of, Sarah's been pretty isolated since then. Lost most of her friends, spending a lot of time alone in that house she fought so hard to keep. Do you feel bad for her? Rachel asked carefully. I considered the question honestly. A little. Not because she doesn't deserve the consequences of her actions, but because I spent 10 years with her. Some of those years were good before she became whoever she is now. Or maybe she was always this way and I just didn't see it. I shook my head. Mostly I feel bad that I wasted so much time trying to be enough for someone who was never going to be satisfied. You were always enough, Rachel said fiercely. She was just too self-absorbed to see it. 6 months after that, Rachel and I moved in together. A new apartment in a new neighborhood, far from the BBQ scene and its lingering gossip. We built something neither of us had experienced before. A partnership based on mutual respect, honest communication, and the radical notion that we actually liked each other's company. I started teaching coding to kids again, the hobby Sarah had dismissed as a waste of time. Rachel went back to school part-time for her master's degree, something she'd postponed repeatedly because Sarah had always needed her to be available for last-minute plans. We adopted a rescue dog named Brisket, in honor of the BBQ where everything changed. One evening, almost a year after that fateful party, we were walking Brisket in the park when Rachel stopped suddenly. What's wrong? I asked. She pointed to a bench about 50 feet away. Sarah sat there alone, scrolling through her phone, looking thinner and tired. She hadn't seen us yet. Do you want to leave? Rachel asked quietly. I looked at my ex-wife, at the woman who'd tried to rewrite our marriage to suit her agenda, who'd threatened the woman I loved, who'd fought viciously to make our divorce as painful as possible. I waited for the anger to rise, for the resentment to boil over, but all I felt was indifference, maybe a little pity. No, I said, taking Rachel's hand. She doesn't get to take anything else from us. Not even this walk. We passed by the bench close enough that Sarah looked up and saw us. Her expression cycled through shock, pain, and then something that might have been regret. For a moment I thought she might say something, might try to engage. But Rachel squeezed my hand and I kept walking. Behind us I heard Sarah call out, "Mark, wait." I didn't turn around, didn't stop, didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Rachel looked up at me, concerned. You okay? Yeah, I said and meant it. I really am. That night, curled up on our couch with Brisket snoring between us and some mediocre action movie playing on TV, Rachel suddenly said, "Thank you." For what? For being brave enough to kiss me that day. I know you did it partly to call Sarah's bluff, but it still took courage. And it freed us both. I kissed the top of her head. Best decision I ever made. Though the second best decision was those flowers I brought to our first real date. Those wilted carnations from the grocery store, Rachel laughed. Those were terrible. You kept them for 2 weeks. Because you looked so nervous handing them to me. It was adorable. We dissolved into laughter, the kind that comes from being completely comfortable with another person, from knowing you can be ridiculous and imperfect and still be loved exactly as you are. Later, as we were getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I'm sorry. For everything. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. As I showed it to Rachel. Should I respond? She considered for a moment. Do you want to? I looked at the message, at those simple words that probably took Sarah months to work up the courage to send. Part of me, the part that had loved her once, long ago, wanted to respond with something gracious and kind, to offer forgiveness and closure. But the bigger part of me, the part that had finally learned to value myself, knew that closure was something I'd already found. I didn't need Sarah's apology to move on because I'd already moved on. No, I said, deleting the message. I don't think I do. Rachel wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. For what it's worth, I think you're pretty damn brave, Mark Henderson. Yeah? I turned to face her. Why's that? Because you rebuilt your entire life from scratch. You walked away from comfort and familiarity in a house with a good mortgage rate, she grinned. And you chose authenticity over easy. That takes real courage. I pulled her close, breathing in her familiar scent, vanilla and something floral I could never quite identify. We chose authenticity, both of us. You were just as brave. Then we're a good match. The best match. Outside, the city hummed with life. People making choices, starting over, falling in love, making mistakes, learning, growing. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably sitting in her too big house scrolling through photos of happier times and wondering where it all went wrong. Maybe someday she'd figure it out. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. My problem, if you could call it that, was figuring out how to make Rachel's birthday special next month, whether we should get a bigger apartment to accommodate Brisket's growing toy collection, and whether I was ready to take the leap and tell her I loved her, even though I was pretty sure she already knew. Hey, Rachel, I said softly. I love you. She pulled back to look at me, her green eyes shining. I know, I've known for a while. Yeah? Yeah, I love you too, in case that wasn't obvious. We stood there in our small bedroom, in our small apartment, with our ridiculous rescue dog snoring in the living room, and I realized something profound. Happiness wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It wasn't about winning arguments or proving points or making other people regret their choices. It was about this. Simple moments. Honest words. Someone who chose you every day without hesitation or condition. The BBQ where everything changed felt like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to different people. In a way, I suppose it had. The man who'd stood at that grill, quietly accepting whatever his wife decided no longer existed. He'd been replaced by someone stronger. Someone who knew his worth. Someone who understood that the door Sarah opened that day hadn't led to his humiliation. It had led to his freedom. And standing here with Rachel, looking at the life we'd built together from the ashes of that spectacular disaster, I couldn't find it in myself to regret a single moment. Not the pain, not the public scene, not the difficult months that followed, because all of it, every humiliating, painful, awkward moment, had led me here. To her, to us, to the quiet, ordinary happiness of choosing each other. And that, I thought as I kissed her goodnight and turned off the lights, that was more than enough. That was everything.